Literally every coach I've ever had has let me down in some way. Most programs out there are going to keep you trapped at level 120. If I don't see myself worthy, when I get there, I'm just still going to have the same problems. I'm just going to have more money. I'm worried that all this stuff isn't going to work out.
After you become aware, how can you stay at a higher level then?
Hey, what's up, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Profitable Chiro Network. I'm so excited for what we're going to talk about. This is one of those episodes where if you're looking for success, I think I've learned over the last couple years, success comes from a place where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. So Heather, I know you've been excited for this one. We're going to talk about levels of energy.
Woo.
And specifically ascension. And so when I say ascension, what I actually mean is like people stepping up on an energy scale. So this is not something that I came up with, but I think it's important for people to understand because I had this huge realization over the course of the last probably year that has shown me specifically why some people get stuck in certain places. And it has everything to do with what we're going to talk about in this episode.
Okay.
So if somebody's feeling stuck, if they're feeling like they're behind, and this could be in any area. So in the way their physical body either feels or looks, in their finances, in their relationships, either with God or the universe or their spouse or their kids. And even, like any area that somebody would be successful, I think is what we'll talk about. And I did not come up with this. So there are two people who are key in understanding. This is Frederick Dodson, and then the person who came up with it first is Dr. David Hawkins. And they talk about this idea of levels of energy, or Dr. Hawkins would call it the map of consciousness. And there's a very biblical explanation to all this, but I've talked about that on other episodes of the podcast when we talk about what fear creates in the body versus it doesn't. So I'm not going neurological.
Okay.
We're talking strictly emotions and mental states on this episode and how to get people to actually ascend to where they want to be.
Okay.
That sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So biggest thing is that most programs out there, this is going to be a bold statement. Most programs out there are keeping you trapped and keeping you stuck from reaching your full potential.
Like a coaching program?
Coaching programs. Much of what I think is sold out in the marketplace it could be coaching programs. That's where my heart generally wants to go. I think a lot of them are keeping people stuck. And I didn't have this realization until like 6 months ago. And as I started putting this together, the goal is not to necessarily call those programs out on this, but just to show people what it looks like to ascend through life based on energy levels that Dodson and Hawkins talk about. But talking about them within the context of how you could potentially be a more successful, less stressed out, better parent, better entrepreneur, better human being episode. And I think one of my passions and my purpose is to just get people, it doesn't matter through how we do it, but getting people to understand that they were designed with a specific potential. And I would argue that we all have that same potential to be healthy, to be financially successful, to be fit, to be happy, to be joyful. However you define success, it doesn't necessarily matter.
Right.
But there's a very specific understanding of these energy levels that, in my opinion, are the only way that would allow you to get there.
Okay.
How are we doing so far?
Yeah, tell us more.
All right, sweet. So we're just going to get right into the levels of energy. Like I said, kind of the premise for this whole episode is that most programs out there are going to keep you trapped at level 120. So we'll get to level 120. So the first thing we have to do is we're going to step back and we're just going to look at the energy levels. And I can share if you want me to give examples along the way.
Please
just stop and interrupt me.
Yeah.
If I give you examples for every single one, we'll be here for 4 hours. So this might be a little bit of a quicker, shorter episode, just depending on where we go and where we flow with it. So interrupt as needed. All right. So levels of energy. So there are 3 levels, primary levels. There's a low, there's a mid level, and then there's a high level. We're going to start at the low and we'll work our way up because this is in life. I think this should be everyone's goal. And I don't want to set goals for people, but I know it's for me. And if it's true for me, it's probably going to be true for other people too. But ascending through the levels of energy. So level 30, 0 to 30 are going to be the lowest levels. So 0, life is possible, but it's going to be very difficult to be alive. If we bump up just a little bit on the 0, and 0, like you can still be alive, but 0 to 30, we'll just say are guilt, shame, and hatred. So already, these are emotional states.
Yes.
That can sync up to different parts of the body that someone experienced. We'll talk about that in a later episode, but guilt, shame, and hatred. If we bump up just a little bit to level 50, we get to apathy, despair, and hopelessness. Diagnosis for this would be depression. Mm-hmm. So someone who's clinically diagnosed with depression is probably at an energy level of about 50. Mm. Before I go any further, I should probably also say that these can change from day to day, from week to week. We can jump in and out of them based on context, but most people have a primary operating one, which I'll share with you once we get to that level, but I'm not going to share it before.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep.
All right, sweet. So level 50, apathy, despair, hopelessness. So here's what's interesting. If I have guilt and shame, mm-hmm. but then I start to feel despair in my life or hopeless, that's a higher level energy. It's better. So that would actually indicate healing.
Wow.
So if I go from apathy, I don't care about anything, to I'm depressed and I feel hopeless, that's better.
Because you're actually feeling something.
That's healing. Yeah, there's a feeling in there, mm-hmm. right? So, and you said it so perfectly. Feelings, the feelings matter. And what we'll see is that the way this is organized is the exact same way the brain is organized. And we'll talk about that in a second. Mm-hmm. Level 80, we get to grief, sorrow, and self-pity. So now, instead of feeling depression and hopelessness, I start to feel sorry for myself. Or I start to grieve other people or something that happened to me. I start to feel sorry or sorrowful. Level 100, we continue bumping up fear, worry, or shyness, which is where I would argue that I've lived for most of my life.
Okay, give us examples for that then.
Yeah, so most of my life, I think and I didn't realize this until I was older, but I think most of my life I always cared about what other people thought about me. And I don't know necessarily where that came from. Mm-hmm. I could speculate and we could talk about some of my healing, but we don't need to do that on this episode. But there's a real, I just care. I was shy. I didn't want to talk to other people. I didn't want people to get close to me. I was afraid that I would, in baseball would be a perfect example. I could throw pitch after pitch after pitch, strike. Right. Put me in the game. I would start to walk people and I would get in my head. And I just constantly had this worry that I was going to mess up, or a shyness of I'm not as good as those people, so I don't want to be around them. And this is friends groups. I could walk you through a million different stories from when I was younger. Going all the way back, a silly example would be, I had a friend come over to our house one time, which is very rare. We weren't allowed to have people over that often. A whole other story. But my next door neighbor was 2 or 3 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And so we were all three playing basketball, but the friend that I had older and my next door neighbor started playing one-on-one together and just kind of left me out. And I'm I had this deep hurt by it. Cause I'm oh, he's not playing with me. And this isn't middle school, maybe in elementary school.
Yeah.
Later elementary school. So that level of energy, fear, worry, shyness, right? So I'm only at a level 100. If we go up to level 120, this is where I said people get stuck. A lot of people get stuck. And specifically with a lot of the coaching programs that I see out there, craving, needing, compulsion, or unfulfilled desires.
How is that so then with the programs?
I think that the way that a lot of things are marketed and advertised is, hey, you need this thing to be worthy. Mm. And I don't want to say too much because I will call out specific programs and specific people and people that I care about. And it's not the point of this episode to do so. So I want to be very careful with my words. But if we're teaching people to crave a certain lifestyle or desire a certain thing or being needy, level 120. And if we're marketing that way, we're attracting people in that way. And then it creates a lack within their mind, so they stay stuck there forever, craving, needing, wanting. Which means that they can't ascend it. And I'll circle back and I'll talk about this in a second. How are we doing so far?
Okay.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. All right, sweet. Level 160, anger, aggression, coldness. What's up? You look like you're thinking something.
No. I'm taking it in.
Level 160, anger, aggression, coldness. And then the last of the low levels of energy is pride, superiority, and arrogance. So based on the last episode, when we recorded that one,
Right.
I lived a lot of my life there. But I also, as I mentioned too, lived in that like worry. So you can notice that these are the low levels of energy. This is pretty much where I operated all the time.
Yeah. And you would go back and forth between all of those. That's what you're saying.
And I think there are a lot of programs out there that attract people and get them to achieve these levels of things. And they just stay stuck there. And there's always craving and desire and there's need, but there's never anything that ascends level 190.
Right. Because they're already set in that like lack mentality and energy.
Yep.
And so like people marketing to them of like wanting that more.
Yeah.
Got it.
A good example of this would be like, think about a commercial that market, I want to say pharmaceutical commercial that markets that, hey, you need this thing, you need to take this thing because you're broken and it will fix you. But what that creates is a need, which is a 120.
So essentially, I feel like all marketing in general is directly correlating to that level.
A lot of it is. It doesn't have to be though, because there are levels beyond it,
Right.
right?
But would you say like the majority of the population aren't above that? So for them to be drawn to that is not going to be the case.
Yep. So here's where it gets interesting is if we go to, so we're going to ascend, we're going to go, and remember this is a scale, right? So like if I go from craving and needing and wanting and desiring
Yeah.
to being pissed off and angry,
Yeah.
I ascended a level of
It's
energy.
actually better.
Better. If I go from anger, I'm mad and I'm cold towards my wife, and then I think I'm better than her, I've ascended again.
That's technically
but it's still
better.
not good.
Right,
So
right.
those are the low levels of energy. If we get to level 200, most of the population in the world lives below level 200. This is according to Dotson and Dr. Hawkins. So this is not me. This is their research. They've done a lot of it. They use kinesiology to test it. I see the same things, even though we don't necessarily do kinesiology per se.
Right.
In our office, I see the exact same things.
Yeah.
So level 200 is contentment, routine, and boredom. So if we go all the way back to the first episode, when you and I lived in Indiana, we
Yeah.
had the house, white picket fence, we had good jobs. This was Daniel Kimbley, pre-chiropractic school,
Yes.
pre-living in California. I was content, but I was also bored, and we were in a very strict routine. And I was also like wickedly addicted because I was bored.
Yes.
Level 200. Most people live there. I live for Friday so I can watch the game, and Saturday so I can sit on the couch, and I start to dread work on Saturday night, and then I dread work all day Sunday, and then I do the same thing over again. Many, many people, not good, bad, right, or wrong, it's just an understanding and having awareness of this, which I think is important, live that same day or that same week 40 years of their lives.
Literally just living to live.
Yep. Contentment, routine, boredom. So then if we bump up, then we get to level 275, which is courageous, relaxation, eagerness, and fun.
Can I ask you a question? Do
Ask.
you know why those initial first few were like 20 at a time, but then this one is like 75? Is that because it's so much more challenging and so much more energy to get to that space?
It takes literally a different neurology to get to that next level. So to go from bored to fun, what did I have to do?
You had to break routine for
I
sure.
had to quit a job,
Yeah.
give up everything that I knew, take a risk to go into debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars
Right.
to chiropractic school.
You like literally flipped everything upside down.
Had to. So that's a huge jump. But to go from, well, I feel guilty because I had these things in my past to my life is just hopeless and it doesn't mean anything and I'm depressed,
Yeah.
that's just a little small jump. It's pretty easy to get people there.
Because those emotions are a little bit correlated as well, would you say? Yeah.
Yep, they're more closely related. So
Yes.
as we ascend, it gets harder and harder and harder, and you'll see why.
To jump.
So again, this is what I'm saying. Like the argument is that people get stuck at 120 because no one's teaching people how to not crave and desire. Because what we should be teaching people is what Jesus taught us, is that you're already enough. The
Right.
reason that he died is because we were worthy of the cost.
Yes. And you have enough
You're already
within
enough.
him. Yes.
I made you enough. Yeah. Your sins are all forgiven. You don't need to have guilt, shame, apathy, despair. It's all forgiven. You don't need to be bored. You should just be able to have fun and enjoy life and be eager and be able to relax. But most people can't relax. Psalm 23. I said I wasn't going to talk about scripture, and then here I am talking about scripture. What do you know? Psalm 23. He lets me lie down in green pastures. Like, what does that mean? When David wrote that, like what he's saying is that God didn't need him to be needing and have all these desires to build some big empire. God's just like, all you have to do, bro, is just lie down and enjoy what I already created. Like, it's simple. And I'm going to walk with you and I'm going to lead you through the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm going to lead you right into a table with your enemies. And you'll forever be blessed in my kingdom. But if you have fear, you can never get there. So there's a relaxation and a courage that it takes to realize that you're just being led.
Yeah.
But that's way harder than just going like, well, I'm worried that all this stuff isn't going to work out. So that's why it gets harder to ascend as we go higher and higher and higher in the energy levels, which is why 80% of the population is below level 200.
And those are also like, wouldn't you say like fleshly desires?
Yeah. So we start to get out of it. And fun could still technically be fleshy. So like
Sure.
but again, these are just the mid-level energy. So
Yeah.
we'll get to the higher one. So if we jump, so we're going to jump from 275 to 320. 320 is willingness, kindness, optimism. So now I no longer crave and have a compulsion and a need and a desire, but I'm just willing. I'm willing to be obedient and I'll be kind and I'm optimistic that it's going to happen.
Kind of like going with the flow.
I don't need to crave. Yeah. I don't need to be a striver, high achiever. It's great to be those things. I'm not saying that's wrong, but based on the levels of energy, a lot of people think that they're operating at a super high level, but they're really no higher than 190. Like, I'm arrogant, I'm prideful, I have an ego, I'm craving and desiring all these things.
Yeah.
But that's a lower level of energy. It's a lower operating system.
So would you say a lot of people that have like bigger businesses, CEOs, VPs, etc., they are technically at that lower energy?
Not all of them.
Well, no, I understand that, but like in general, with the way they are operating business, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on who it is. It depends on the person. So it's not to say like everybody who has a big business is, like there's if you listen to, there's a guy named Dan Martell, like he's for sure above 320. If you listen to all of his content, like this is the kind of stuff that he's talking about, like how to be altruistic and how to build a team and how to save time and how to have a family. And like, none of it is like grind harder.
Right.
None of it is grind harder. He realized like there's a smarter way to work. And that's what he's all about, is getting into this courageousness, this eagerness, this having fun, this living a lifestyle. And he shows it. And it's amazing. So then we're going to do another big jump. We go from 320 to 400. 400 is acceptance, attention, and neutrality. So again, it's like, I don't want to say complacency or contentment, because contentment is different than acceptance, but like, it's not arguing with reality. So Byron Katie wrote a book called Loving What Is, where I love her example. She talks about, she said, I would be so bitter and so angry because my kids would leave their socks on the floor.
Yeah.
And I just love that example because it shows that, okay, she had this deep anger, so much anger, by the way, which is level 160, so much anger that she got checked into like an institution. And this is where she kind of figured out her whole process. But what she realized by being there was that she was arguing with reality. She was asking herself, like, why was I so mad about something that had already been done? If I'm angry about it, I can't go back and change time. So this is where loving what is acceptance. It's a higher level of energy. And guess what? Her mental illness dissolved because of what she discovered along the way.
Yeah.
Because she was operating in this higher level of acceptance of what already was.
Right.
Which sometimes acceptance looks like, okay, God, your way is better than my way. And so let me just trust you.
Yeah.
And like accept that we're here for a reason. This does not mean not sitting around and doing nothing.
Right.
So, because remember that a level 275 is eagerness. So I'm eager, I'm willing, but I'm also accepting where I'm at right now too.
So like that mentality of it is what it is that the acceptance?
I would say that's more of contentment or boredom.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's something not positive about the it is what it is. So there's, it's like it's such a subtle like twist of words, right? So content is like, it's fine. But accepting it is like, okay, here's where I'm at. And I'm real about it.
Okay.
But I also know that there's more. Because we could go, if we're content, but then it's like, there's nothing else for my life. This is all it's ever going to be. Then we start to slide all the way back into hopelessness.
Right.
So again, this is why it's harder to ascend through those levels of energy.
Yeah.
And by the way, this all just has to do with the brain and what the brain is able to turn off and modulate or turn on and activate, which we'll get to. Level 400, acceptance, attention, neutrality. Level 450 is intelligence, knowledge, and reason. So there were, for me, when I was teaching, even though I was primarily operating below level 200, I also, when I started to learn about the brain, I had this activation of like excitement of knowledge. So you could see me bounce back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
But doing so because I was willing to learn new things and gain knowledge and start to like really challenge my own intelligence, I started to step up in energy a little bit, which also built momentum for us to get here.
Right.
Which is cool. How are we doing so far?
Yeah.
So those are the mid levels of energy. And again, we'll circle back and talk about how this ties in with the brain. And then if we get into the last, so level 475, this is high level of energy. By the way, most people on an average day-to-day thing don't operate above like 400. It takes a very special person to operate above a level 400.
Not that it's not achievable. It's just like it takes so much.
It's achievable, but we're talking about Gandhi. We're talking about Mother Teresa. We're talking about Jesus. Like people who actually existed. But the average person, like anybody that, I'm sorry, I love a lot of people, but anybody that you or I know personally, without a degree of separation, they're for sure operating below level 450. For sure in a mid-level energy.
Yeah.
And this is like the highest of the highest producers, the best of the best human beings. There's not a lot of people ascend past it on the average normal operating level.
Wow.
They might jump to it for a like quick bit, but then bounce
there.
back. Yeah, staying there or like having their natural operating there is just, it's not very likely. So if we jump up, 475 these are the high levels of energy.
Okay.
This would be joy or creativity. So think about, what do people say? Joy of the Lord. That's a super high level of energy. And I know for me, it's hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy for me to get down on, anything.
Normal every day.
Happen where it just triggers me, spins me, whatever. 505 is beauty and imagination.
Like you just see beauty in everything?
Yep. Appreciation, which is level 530.
I have a question. We can probably return to this. So like a child, they see beauty and they're very imaginative. Majority of the, 3, 4, 5 years old, would you say that they live in that energy level?
Again, it depends on the kid.
Yeah, like on average.
I think they're more inclined to live there.
more often
and
than
it
not.
gets stunted out of them as they grow.
Through like parenting, school systems, environments, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Think about a brand newborn baby,
Mm-hmm.
like first breath into the world. For the most part, like human beings are just obsessed with newborns. They're so cute. They're so adorable. Oh my gosh. How little are they? There's something about them. There's just this like deep unconditional love, which is level 550 that they have because they have there's no other operating system. Nothing's been installed. Arguably, there's something been installed when they're in utero
Because of the stress
because
of
of
the
stress that
mother in the
mom would
womb.
have,
Yeah.
in the environment that mom was in.
Okay.
And we could talk about, again, if we talk about epigenetics and that kind of stuff. So like, I think that kids live in the imagination stage because it hasn't been, I hate to say the word, but beat out of them. No, we don't pretend like that. Don't say that. That's not how we do. That's not a real thing. And then they get pushed back down into, more of like content, accept that it's not a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, that has so much to do with parenting styles as well as school environment, society in general of what's like what they say is right and wrong, all that kind of stuff.
Think about the movie. This is going to seem silly, but think about the movie The Santa Claus is the one that comes up. The kid, Charlie,
Yeah.
deeply believes that there's Santa.
Right.
All of his friends don't. His friends think it's silly. He believes that his dad is Santa, and that's the premise of the movie. But like, he has this deep imagination that his stepdad's trying to beat out of him.
Right.
You got to be realistic, right? So there's this like, we stop being encouraged to believe as deeply
That's so
and
sad.
be as hopeful. Yeah. And you see it all over the place, which is why people can grow up their whole lives in church and then be like, well, God never did a miracle in my life, so I'm going to go somewhere else. Or I'm just whatever. Like you see it all the time, but it's all it is just levels of energy. And you can't have the level, you can't express imagination if you're in a lower level. Like you have to ascend out of it to be able to express imagination again.
Yeah.
Which is why what's interesting, like for me, one of the things that I've noticed is that I have gotten closer to God and prayer has gotten stronger. I've also started to like think about things differently. Where I'm like getting these ideas that I don't really know where they came from. So like there's these little just spurts of being at an imaginative state that I've never been in before.
Right.
And I can't really explain it.
So you're like peaking up into that level and then going back to your normal.
Yeah, I'm talking like seconds
Yeah.
of being there, right? So then if we go, so 505, beauty, imagination, 510 is power and integrity, right? So integrity is huge. Being of your word,
Yes.
very difficult for people to do.
A lot of people, yeah.
Especially based on, one of the hard things for me is like people have certain beliefs where like I don't know, this will probably offend, but we'll just say it like, I believe that God has the power to heal anyone, but not me. Like that's not integrity. Like if you believe in God, that he created all this that we see.
Oh, like if he doesn't have the power to heal you is what you're saying. Got it.
How
Okay.
could you not trust
Yeah.
that within you is the capability to heal? Which would mean like if you're using language, right? We use the language of, oh, I'm broken.
Yeah.
We're going all the way down to level 80. This is why I say you're not broken. Because if you're broken, you're at level 80. This is what the drug companies want you to believe, that you're broken and our pill will fix you.
Right.
Which then just makes you needy and dependent on a pill for the rest of your life, which bumps you up maybe to a level 120. Crazy.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's a level of integrity and like, do you truly believe what you say you believe? And this is why some people would be like, oh, I live in integrity. I'm on a 510. I'm like, no, you're not. Because there are things that you legitimately don't believe to be true. And I would say the same about myself as well. So I'm not just like, I'm not trying to preach to the choir. I'm just sharing like, here's the levels of energy. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I see with other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we go 540, humor and happiness. If we go 550, unconditional love. And then 570 to 1,000 is going to be ecstasy, oneness, divinity. So if you read Dodson specifically, he makes the argument that only Jesus would hit 1,000. Only person ever in history.
Yeah. This may be like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but like people that take something to get to that space of quote unquote ecstasy, like they're not truly in that space. So like what level are they in there? And then like, that's not integrity, of course, but like, what does that mean?
Well, what my question would be this is like, what are they, by doing that, what are they, there's a specific emotion or a specific level of energy that it's actually tapping into. So I want to reach divinity or oneness or ecstasy, but in trying to get there prematurely, what are they doing?
Inauthentically. They're like, you mean like cheating the energies? Is that what you're talking about?
Cheating, but they have a what to get there? Again, go back to the coaching thing that I talked about before.
Oh, like a desire.
A desire.
Yeah.
I have a desire. If you desire something, you're at level. And this is not just, what's cool is like Dodson is not the only person. Dr. Hawkins is not the only person that talks about this. If you read a book like 10X is greater than 2X by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, like they talk about the exact same thing. They don't necessarily use the words level of energy, but Dr. Hardy talks in there about how people who desire things usually don't get them because desire implies a lack.
Yeah.
So if my thought process is I'm going to take a hallucinogen to get me closer to God because I desire to see my past lives or whatever it is.
Right.
But that thought process is implying that there is a lack in your life that you are missing that you can't get without this thing that you have to now depend on, which is the same reason that I said a lot of the programs are the same way. You should depend on this guru and this like, yes, people can help you. I'm all about it. Like I've had tons of coaches, but my experience has been that like literally every coach I've ever had has let me down in some way. And they always say like, hold your people that you look up to like a higher standard.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason why. Is because a lot of the times you can just get wrapped up in this lower level of energy. I desire what they have. I crave what they have. I need what they have. But that implies that you don't have it or that you're not worthy of having it. And so then if you don't have it, then you crave and desire, but that puts you at a lower level of energy. And if you're at that lower level of energy, it's less likely that you'll actually achieve it in the first place.
Wow. That like poses the question of like, well, why get a coach then? You know, like just a generalized question.
Yeah, I think that I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
I get that. Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But what I think what it really boils down to is finding someone going to teach you how to desire stuff differently, or is someone actually there to elevate you to a place where you can ascend these levels of energy in a true identity.
Yes.
Because my argument is that we're all born at a level 1,000.
Right. Because we're born perfect and pure.
Maybe that's blasphemy to say.
We were designed to be born that way.
Yeah. This is really what it comes down to. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that all of us have the same potential to be successful.
Yes.
We're born that way. We have the neurology that way. God made us that way. We're all perfect. And I could share case study after case study after case study of clients that we've taken care of. But if we all have the same potential to be successful, to be healthy, to be happy, then we have to be born at a higher level of energy. And there's a question of nature versus nurture. I think we're all born there, but it gets taxed from us super quickly based on stress.
So stress obviously affects your level of energy.
Yeah, 100%. So if we go, okay, if I'm craving, needing, and I'm compulsive, right? I would also throw like comparison in there. So again, we're talking like a level 120.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm at a level 120, then like I'm only craving what other people have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only needing what other people have. Well, that didn't just come, like the only thing I cared about having or wanting when I was a brand newborn was milk
Right.
and warmth
Safety.
and like contact with my mom and dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted safety. So somehow it gets wired into our identity that we're not worthy and that we're not good enough and that we're less than unless we have this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And it comes back to always this place of like, we just didn't have love. And like we did, our parents loved us, but they're
Right.
also, I mean, you could use so many examples in the Bible
Right.
of like things that happened where, you know, David, everybody looks up to King David, but he also committed adultery. And then what happened? Passed on to his kids. One of them committed even worse sexual sins. And then the other one was like a murderer plus a bunch of sexual sins. So like it got amplified in the next generations. And so these things get passed from generation to generation to generation. And that's why they're harder to break. And I think that's why most people live below level 200.
Because they just don't know how to break it because that's all they know.
Yeah. Did I even answer your question?
Yeah, I think because I was asking about like, well, why coaching? But then like you talked about like being able to find a coach that is able to ascend you and help you reframe your identity.
Yeah.
And
so here's the thing. Okay. I'm desiring for my business to be at $1 million in revenue. I'm craving to be able to live this lifestyle or live in this new house. That's cool.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. You should want those things.
Sure.
God wants those things for you. Yeah. But if you can't accept where you're at now and just love people or love yourself or your family for who they are and who you are, you put yourself at a lower level of energy and it's less likely that you would get those things in the first place. So there's this whole cycle. That's why if you're not learning how to build an identity and you're just learning tactics and skills to get to $1 million, you're going to crave you're going to crave 1.5 and then you're going to crave 2 and then you're going to crave 4.
More new patients.
Because you're not learning, more new patients. Yeah. You're not learning the actual principle, which is acceptance, love, gratitude, appreciation, those like higher levels of energy, when then things just start to flow to you.
Right.
So it's an identity thing.
Because you're essentially repelling.
Yeah, if I don't see myself worthy, unless I have my business at a certain level, well then like when I get there, I'm just still going to have the same problems. I'm just going to have more money. But if I see myself as worthy now, whether I have a $300,000 business or $1 million business or more, like as soon as I have that, then nothing else, like literally nothing else matters.
Yeah.
And then you start to attract because you're not in want or need or lack of anything.
Right.
And this gets into the conversation of like the law of attraction.
Yeah.
But it's also why the Bible says, do not fear, do not fear. I say this on every single episode because it's no coincidence. Like it literally matches up to our neurology, which I'll talk about how this is organized, just like our brain structures in just a second.
Right. Well, law of attraction is essentially like levels of energy in that regards, is what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And then, so like in the Bible, talking about do not fear, love your neighbor, etc., like that is essentially the levels of energy as well.
Yeah, so this isn't like some woo-woo hippie concept.
Right.
It's just Dr. Hawkins and Dr. Dotson. I don't know if Frederick Dotson's actually a doctor, so I might take that back. But Frederick Dotson, like when they lay these out, the levels of energy, the map of consciousness.
Yes.
They're just laying out, like they could measure these different emotional states and put a number to them. So then that way it's actually measurable. And the way that they discovered this is like they use kinesiology or muscle testing to figure out what levels these different emotions are. So that's kind of where the scale came in.
And most people, because of stress, are in the lower levels of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So could you say that by addressing that stress specifically through like getting adjusted, that you can directly ascend them to a different level of energy?
Yeah, I think the first step is awareness. I have to be aware before I can ascend.
So like if you are never aware of it, you can never ascend.
How many times have people, like we see this all the time where people are like, no, I don't have any problems. Like everything's perfect in my life.
Right.
And I'm like, then why is everything chaos in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, it's not. It's perfect. And I'm like, but you complain about it all the time.
Mm.
But my life is perfect, but I complain about it. I'm like, you're not even aware that you have an issue.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware, how could you address it?
Right. So
It would be just like this. If there was a leak, I had water leaking in my house. If there was a little tiny pinhole in a pipe, I can give you an example from here. There were, over the course of like a few weeks, I noticed that tiles starting to get wet on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And we called a plumber eventually because I'm like, hey, this doesn't seem right. There's water on the floor. So he comes in and he's like, oh, you have a pinhole leak in your pipe. Well, long before we saw water on our floor, it was leaking because the neighbors next door had puddles, like their whole bathroom floor was covered in water because they sit lower than us just by a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the plumber literally said to us, he's like, they just put towels down and like they weren't going to do anything with it. He's like, I'm so glad you guys called because it had gotten bad enough. So like if there's not an awareness,
Right.
you don't call the plumber to fix it.
Yeah.
It's only when stuff is like flooding and overflowing, because even the neighbors had an overflow and a flood and they didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Once we saw the tiles were wet, that's when we're like, okay, there's an issue.
Yeah.
So it's the same concept. If you don't know or the symptoms aren't bad enough, then you're probably not going to do anything with it. For us, it was literally like I literally had the moment where it was like, you are going to be in this world with all these people who are now dead and overdosed, or you're going to make a decision to leave. And that was like the same year that I said, hey, we're going to chiropractic school.
So like how does somebody become aware of it though? Like
you have to have somebody who can teach you the way. This is what Jesus did with the disciples.
Yeah.
He's like, I know you didn't catch any fish all day. Take your nets, go out in the middle of the sea. And they're like, we've already fished there. There's no fish there. And he's like, just go again. And then they catch so many fish that their nets are bursting. They come back to shore and they're like, thank you. And he's like, yeah, exactly. There's a different way. Why don't you come follow me and I'll teach you the way. But teaching the way and teaching you how to buy a Lambo or desiring to have a sex life with your wife, those are two different things. So Jesus is teaching like a paradigm for how to live.
Yes.
Which gets into, there's no, like, it's so far beyond this is about me or the things that I desire or crave in my life below level 200.
Right.
He's bumping people all the way up to like, hey, why don't you use your imagination? Why don't we focus on identity?
See the beauty in everything.
See the beauty in everything. Like even on the cross, God forgive them. They know not what they do.
Mm-hmm.
He's forgiving. He's loving. He's honoring them. The same people who persecuted him.
Mm-hmm.
But he's literally like a paradigm for how to live. So let's go into the brain, because what's interesting about this is when we have low-level energy, mid-level energy, high-level energy, it's organized in the exact same way that the brain's organized. So, of course, this is what's crazy. So low levels of energy, safety, guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, worry, brainstem. There's 3 levels in the brain. There's 3 like big categories of levels of energy. So the first level of the brain is the brainstem. It's responsible for our safety. Second level is our limbic system. So that's the emotional system. So we go from level 200 is like, I'm content.
Yep.
But then we start to get into willingness, kindness, optimism, hopefulness, relaxation. We can't relax unless our limbic system can tell our brainstem to chill. This is why kiddos, like, they're going to cry, a newborn baby, they're going to cry when they're hungry. They're going to cry when they need their diaper changed. They have no other form of communication.
Because the other parts of their brain aren't developed yet anyway,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
So, but then as they start to grow, what's the first thing they start doing around 3 months? Also, the same time that they lift their head, is they
Right.
start to smile, because the other parts of the
Emotion.
brain, they're starting to develop this emotional part of the brain. They're starting to show happiness and eagerness and willingness, and they're starting to learn and do these things that's like far beyond contentment.
Yeah.
Then, as the brain continues to develop, the cortex comes online, and the cortex is all this higher level stuff: happiness, unconditional love, oneness, etc. That's where we would hope to get to.
Right.
Optimism, those don't exist in the brainstem. We don't need to be optimistic if we think we're going to die.
Right.
We actually need to be very fearful and worried so that we can make sure that we survive.
Safety. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the whole name of the game. So just like these levels of energy are organized, the brain is organized and structured in the exact same way.
That is so cool.
Yeah. And this goes back to, like, the Bible talks about this in Romans. I can't remember what. I think it's Romans 12:2. Don't quote me on that. But in Romans, my paraphrase of it is this, is that everything that we see in the natural physical world that we can touch with our hands is simply a mirror of what's in the spiritual. So we talk about, if the levels of energy is spiritual, we can see a direct reflection of it if we cut our body in half and we looked at our brain from the side. We can see it organized: brainstem, limbic system, cortex. 3 levels. Everything in the natural is a mirror of the spiritual.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's super cool. So it's like he left us all these clues on how to be
Right.
and how to operate.
Right.
And the name of the game is to ascend the levels of energy.
To get to the frontal cortex.
To get to
Working
the
properly.
cortex. Yeah. Which you can do by getting ingested, which you can do by prayer, which you can do by meditation, which you can do by connecting with other people and having good, healthy relationships, which you can do by exercising, which you can do by eating well. Like, there's a number of things that breath work is another one of those. Like, there are a lot of things that you can do to start to activate the frontal cortex, but you have to start with the awareness that any of this exists in the first place. Because how many people I know who are like, oh, I'm healthy, I'm fine, I eat clean, and I go to the gym. But you start to look under the hood, and they're apathetic.
I was going to say they're essentially like dead inside. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of sorrow. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of whatever. And those things just leave them stuck. And at best, they're like, I desire to have a 6-pack. I desire to get up to 220 on the scale and have bigger muscles. Low level of energy.
So after you become aware, how can you stay at a higher level then?
A lot of things. Go back and listen to last week's episode. For one, I think that's crucial. But I'm always so biased, but like, you have to address the frontal cortex of the brain.
Yeah.
If you don't have a strong frontal, the strong frontal can't turn off the feelings of fear, anxiety, worry, those low levels of energy.
Right.
So the cortex is what turns off those lower levels of energy. So it has to be strong.
Yeah.
The brain develops from the bottom up, low level, mid level, high level, but the brain is controlled from the top down, high level, mid level, low level. So if the high level is not functioning, we're going to operate in the mid level. If the mid level is not functioning well, we're going to operate in the low level. We have to have a safety. We have to feel a sense of safety in order to get to the higher levels.
The next one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you skip levels at a time?
Of course you can skip levels. That's what I'm saying. That's what's so interesting, right? It's like the tricky part, like it's going to be harder to jump. Like, let's say, for instance, it's going to be harder to jump from 30 if you feel guilt, shame, and hatred of yourself or other people. The likelihood that you're jumping up to 200 and you're just going to be content all of a sudden with your life is super low.
Sure.
And it's even lower that you would jump from guilt to joy. Like, it's just too big of a jump. And it literally would take a reshaping of how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you see, is it impossible? No, because anything's possible.
That reshaping of your identity.
But like, to go from guilt to grief or self-pity, like, think about, okay, I feel guilty that I did something wrong. Or I'm apathetic, where it's like, I don't care about anything. To then go to like, man, I really hate that I did that. That's like, that's a huge jump. Then you're starting to feel something. But to go from there's no hope in my life to like, I'm happy and joyful, that's so difficult. You would have to ascend like slowly through the levels. And this is how healing occurs. But if I'm not aware that I have guilt and I'm trying to build a big, huge business, like that guilt is like an anchor just pulling on me the entire time.
Right. That makes sense.
Like, you might be able to do it, but I would imagine at some point it will break or you will break.
Yeah.
And most people do. You see it all the time. People build these huge things and then it completely collapses. And then they're getting a divorce and the kids don't like him. And then there's a whole mess to clean up because they never dealt with the lower levels of energy first. So that's why I said before is like the awareness is so, so key. If I'm aware that I'm actually operating in fear like 90% of the time, okay, cool. Now I can start to catch myself in those places. And then if I catch myself in those places, I can start to make a different decision to just like, all right, I'm going to accept it.
Can you go from like a higher level of energy immediately to like a lower level energy due to like a traumatic event or experience?
For sure.
Or
yeah, I think, and that's where I think the training becomes involved. And like Jesus did is like, he had to train. I mean, you could think about Peter, you could think about Judas.
Yeah.
They were rolling with the King of Kings, the operating at 1,000.
Yeah.
Like, that's who they hung around with. So their heart space was in the right space. But Judas, for like a couple shekels, he dropped all the way back into compulsion,
Right.
unfulfilled desire of finances, like quick. So it's that easy. Adam and Eve, same thing. Eve's like, oh yeah, I desire to have more knowledge. Like, this is just the story of the Bible is all it is.
Yeah.
I'm realizing that just now. It's simply the story of the Bible, which also mirrors how our brain develops.
Yes.
And how our brain functions. So I would say first thing you can do if you're looking to level up levels of energy is just become aware.
Right.
I would highly encourage you to read the book, Frederick Doxson's book. It's heady, but it's really, really good. And like, if you're wanting help, like, dude, just reach out.
Yeah. Or write a comment.
You can leave a comment.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Ask questions.
There's so many ways that you can get help in starting to move through these, but it just starts with that awareness. So starting to take a true inventory.
Yeah.
A really cool thing, if you're into praying or meditating, I would say just ask, like, God, what do you say? Like, where do you see me at? Not where do I see myself, but God, where do you see me?
Yeah.
Because he's going to tell you the truth and he's going to be honest with you.
And also by like asking the questions of like, where can I heal my heart? That kind of stuff will ascend as well because it'll make you more aware and processing those emotions differently.
Yeah. And then there's a level of like there has to be a level of forgiveness because you have to, one, forgive yourself, probably forgive others in the process.
Sure.
So if I'm like, okay, God, what do you say about me? Then I can go to the next level, which the next level is going to be like, all right, if you say that about me, then where did it come from? So now I'm starting to gain an awareness. And then once I have an awareness of where it came from, then I can start to go and forgive people or forgive myself. And I can start to process those out.
Right.
And then we can get to a like replacement of new thoughts.
Which is all reframing your identity.
This is building an identity. That's all it is. That's how you build an identity. And it's how you build a true identity. But no one's true identity is like, you can just buy a Rolex or have a Lambo or have $1 million business. That's no one's identity.
Right.
It's way higher than that.
And way deeper.
Way deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're craving the Lambo, if you're craving the $1 million business, if you're craving the like spouse who looks a certain way, you're literally keeping yourself stuck at a lower level of energy. You can appreciate those things. Appreciation and craving and desiring are two different things.
Right.
So appreciating them is great. Desiring, not. And you got to break it, but it starts with identity.
Yeah.
If you want more help on how to do it, reach out. Anything else, babe? Cool. Love you guys. We'll come at you next week. Peace.